Sally is a psychotherapist. She used to be, and perhaps still is for all I know, a solicitor. And she's part of SAFPAC and also the whatever we're a part of.
Critical Psychotherapy Network. So.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, okay, so Sally is going to ask, what am I supposed to be? Okay, Sally, thanks a lot. Do you want me to stop you after 15 minutes so that we can have questions?
Yeah, sure. Give me a nod about 15 minutes and let me know how we're doing.
I will do. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Sally.
Thanks. Right, I'm going to kick off with a short poem. Man, woman, feminine, masculine, binary, plural, fixed, fluid, nature, culture, powerful, vulnerable. Neither one nor the other. Sometimes both, all. I was supposed to be Jonathan. My mum and dad had always wanted a boy, and they had one child, not a boy. I grew up in the 60s in a working class area in the north of England. My dad had been in the war and had bullet holes all down his legs. He didn't show his emotions. My mum was pretty and feminine, but things weren't what they seemed. My mum had a will of steel. She directed everything from behind the masquerade of submissiveness to men. My dad died of a horrible, painful disease. How are you, Dad? No bad, you. Years after his death, I can now look back and understand him more. His construction, his constriction, his vulnerability and fear, his sensitivity, stoicism, love and courage. I'm now so sorry that I hadn't been more open to him when he was alive, but then I was just like him. As a child, I dressed like the boys up the street, but on days when I was presented to the world, my mum would put me in girly clothing that no other local girl actually ever wore. I hated being dressed as a girl. I played with the boys up the street, football, cowboys and Indians, British bulldogs. I identified with George in the famous Five. I was more of a boy than a boy. I peed standing up. I jeered at weakness. I joined in bullying the girls until when I was 11, half naked, playing war, one of the boys said, "You've got boobs." It was true. I ran home, put on a t-shirt and swaggered back a bit later as if nothing had happened. The boys were setting out to get conkers. One of them, my best friend, said, "You can't come. Girls don't go conquering." And that was that. I had to make a home for myself in the world of girls. Not that I ever made myself at home there. Being a girl has always seemed alien, as if it wasn't really me, but I'm not a boy either. And I think I've settled down as being a bit of both. I've had 59 years to think this over. Some of that thinking is what makes up this little talk. I have this play in mind, scene, many characters on stage. A spotlight shines on a naked infant. A spectator points at a part on the tiny body. Player one. "What's this?" A puppet enters left, its strings ending in the dark. Voice from above as the puppet's mouth moves. "A penis." Player one. "What does that mean?" All other characters on stage and voices off shout answers. In the confusion, no individual voice is intelligible. End of Act 1. My microplay is doomed to disgruntle. It's not true to life. What person in possession of language could ask these questions? We all know what a penis is and what it means. And who is this puppet that carries the answer? Whence its authority? And why doesn't its voice come from its mouth? The writer might say, don't blame the puppet. The answer was written before the question, and the puppet has no choice in the matter. And by the way, the workings of the stage do not permit the appearance of the hoodlum holding the strings. It doesn't even know it's a puppet. Please don't tell. "Above you," cries the audience to the puppet, unable to contain its collective anxiety. The puppet looks up, grimaces, sees nothing in the dark but the realization that it is on strings. The theatre starts to panic. Suddenly a voice comes from the puppet's mouth. Don't worry, everyone. It means it's a boy. Calm ensues. The play can go on. For most people, the idea that gender may be constructed, invoked, all in the mind, created from a hidden psychic drama, the effect of a discourse inscribed onto sex, of sex itself as an effect of discourse, of a genealogy that conceals itself as what it generates, is not the stuff of everyday chat. But if you're to ask, do you think you're a bit like your dad? Do you think your dad would approve of you? What do you think of that bloke who gets all the girls and earns loads? What would it be like to wear makeup at work or burst into tears, or not be allowed to wear makeup or burst into tears? These questions may elicit identification or refusals of identification with the paternal and with masculinity. Reflections on a matrix that sets the scene for the performance of the everyday. Judith Butler wrote a book called Gender Trouble in 1990. In it, she questioned the categories of sex and gender. I remember reading that book when I was pregnant. I didn't finish Gender Trouble, it was too troubling. By that time, I was a prisoner of my sex. I pushed the baby into the world. I fed the baby from my body. I went part-time at work. I did the majority of the household and childcare tasks. I cried. It seemed I'd surrendered in the world of women, physically vulnerable, economically dependent, an object of contempt to me and the baby father. I was zigzagging between being a lawyer and being a mum covered in milky sick, not knowing which I was meant to be and full of guilt. Meanwhile, the baby father worked longer hours, socialised, played manly sport, got ahead in his career, and came home asking what was for tea. He was irritable and anxious, caught up in acting out the masculine responsibility to provide. The relationship nearly splintered on the rocks of expectation of what we were supposed to be and our resentment at having to be it. We can sit and reflect together, now we're old, on how crushing it is to be prisoners of gender. I've returned to the work of Judith Butler, including Gender Trouble. In that book of the 1990s, Butler explores the stories people tell about gender and gender construction. She surveys established liturgies, structuralism, Oedipus, the paternal law, language, the politics of sex, desire, interrogating, destabilising, and unearthing lines of power concealed within the process of their very establishment.
Sally, 3 minutes, Sally.
Oh, really?
Well, if you're allowing time for questions, yes.
Give me 15 minutes, I'm going to try and get through it. Although concerned with feminism, I've found this book and Butler's other work tremendously helpful in the therapy room for loosening up my thinking around the bindings of masculinity, particularly the masculinity in myself. The roots of the Lacanian empire of the phallus might be traced from Levi Strauss' description of women as items of exchange in a system that enables the bonding of men and the creation of a man's world. But as James Brown pointed out, that world don't mean nothing without a woman or a girl. In Lacan's fantasy, women are the phallus, while men have the phallus. The feminine is the signifier of the other's desire, women fated to abandon everything about themselves, to enter into perpetual masquerade in order to constitute masculinity. Women become the unbearable conclusion of not having. Lacan's formulation of Freud's Oedipal drama recapitulates the genesis of male identity and the power of the paternal as instituted from a point of fear. Sons born of the threat of mutilation, the horror of not having a penis, avoidable by the renunciation of the maternal. Prior to this forced renunciation, all babies can be pre-gendered creatures of jouissance, vulnerable, blissfully dependent in the womb and on maternal care. Then comes the bifurcating choice. You can have your masculinity cut off, or you can have your vulnerability cut off. Deprivation is framed only as the loss of the male genitalia. I ask, why is the threat posed seen as castration? Why not as the blocking of the vaginal passage, the royal road to the womb, the maternal, the locus of care, permissible vulnerability, and the polymorphous perversity? Does the boy feel forever deprived without knowing of what? The castration story is what you get when you look at everything from the point of view of the penis. It's the phallic, says Lacan, no less than the entry into language, that without which there is no thought, no before, no after, no being. That little jelly of flesh that can be wobbled in fun, fiddled with for comfort, a bodily weapon of war, a source of unspeakable pleasure, is assumed into the mythic, the fetishistic, fantastic incarnation. But as the privileged signifier of meaning that is always materially unstable, the phallus is also the bar to any possible wholeness of personality. In the violent constitutive process of gender creation, of entry into the symbolic, paradoxically, the jouissance of womb swimming, of polymorphous possibility, becomes a forgotten memory. After this, all is barred, so that nothing can be what it is, nothing can mean what it says, nothing can be attained, no demand satisfied. All there is to be shy of the mark. There's thus only a perpetual nostalgic search for lost times, and it seems to me that masculinity is fated to an endless quest, all versions of masculinity falling short of the mark. The sense of oneself as masculine enough has always to be refilled, reaffirmed, the pursuit of the unattainable, creating a perpetual imposter anxiety. Look what I've got is the cry that obscures, look what I haven't got. Terrified of being laughed at, especially by women, it takes up a defensive aggression, a demand to self-augment. Sometimes the demand is played out large, like wars, rape, regimes like Taliban, but other times it emerges in the banality of everyday interaction. I return to Judith Butler. Her work has helped me. In 2004, she published Precarious Life. In thinking about the events following 9/11 and the Bush invasion of Iraq, about the firework optics of shock and awe and Guantanamo Bay, she called to aid the idea of the face developed by Emmanuel Levinas. The face in its absolute vulnerability, the demand not to kill. An alterity, not next to you, but always above you. I want to suggest that the embracing of vulnerability in self and others enables a different relationship to take place to that determined by any form of masculinity. In Totality and Infinity, Levinas writes that violence does not consist so much in annihilation of the other, but interruption of the other's continuity, making them play roles in which they no longer recognise themselves, making them betray their own substance and carry out actions that destroy every possibility for action. I ask, does the violence of the enforced renunciation of the maternal have this interruptive effect? Does the violence of gender hierarchy have this effect? Both Lacan and Levinas might say that the self cannot survive on its own, cannot find meaning within its own being in the world. But the vital distinction is that for Lacan, this is a lack filled by the positioning of the feminine as a reflective, echoing, subject-enhancing object, while for Levinas, this is a vulnerability which is the stem of love, the ethical position that the other's right to exist has primacy over my own. The other's face exposes me as the usurper of the place of the other. I want to suggest that masculinity, insofar as it's a posture required to mask a loss or a lack of that which intrinsically denotes the masculine, always attempts to position the other as object, always usurps. I would suggest that it's when the lack is understood not as an absent penis, but as a violent blocking of access to the maternal, that relief from masculinity might be permitted. Finished.
Thank you, Sally. There's time for a couple of questions if anybody has them, and then we're going into a 10-minute break.
No question, just an appreciation, if I may.
Yes,
Thank
Manu,
you, Matt.
off you go.
My goodness, where to start? Prisoners of gender. Look what I got, look what I haven't got. I understand that to be, bear with me, look what I haven't got, a vagina. Look what I haven't got as a man, a willingness to be psychically and also maybe physically penetrated. And what else? could this melancholia we talked about and loss and sadness could relate in a man to having to have ejected homosexuality for a heterosexual man. For me as a heterosexual man, could part of my melancholia, incurable melancholia, have to do with the fact that I have to eject my homosexuality, my desire for other men? And isn't this exclusionary move the very making of identity? And finally, of course, Levinas. Pity, though, that he couldn't say the same for the Palestinians. A great shame that he couldn't say the same for the Palestinians. But thank you. I'm overwhelmed, overjoyed, and it will take me months to digest this. I hope I can read this, and I hope Dell will make available, if people have the papers, or at least some kind of some writing of these great talks that we had today. But I absolutely loved it. Thank you. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you. I mean, just to say something about melancholy, I think that's absolutely right, that there is that intrinsic melancholy, which perhaps does stem from, you know, the forced renunciation, not just of in the Freudian saga, you know, the rejection of the mother, the maternal, you know, of wanting to fuck your mum, but of, you know, in terms of the polymorphousness, not just of that desire, but of the very mode of desire. You know, that it's a mode of desire that has to be renounced, and that you know, like in the abjecting of it, there's something lost, which is then internalized, you know, and brought into permanent melancholy. You know, it can't be let go. It can't really be let go, but you know, it's always there. That which is enunciated. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, excuse me, Sally. Thank you. Okay, we'll go into a 10-minute break now. So if we could come back at 20 past 3, it'll be a 9-minute break now. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sally. That was amazing.
That was great, Sally. Really, really good.
Thanks, Tony.
I really enjoyed it. And I'll have to get some notes from you, Levinas's view of violence and all sorts of stuff. But yeah.
It's very difficult to time. I thought I was cracking really through it.
Yeah.
I think it was super. Thank you, Sally. I would say though that whilst I'm very much influenced by Levinas, yeah. Although I think your quote was from the Wilde's introduction to Levinas. Actually, there is the issue with Levinas that he still takes the neutral as masculine.
Oh yeah, I mean there were loads of problems with Levinas and women. And the feminine. I mean, you just need to read some of his stuff.
Yeah, but nevertheless.
Well, I mean, let's face it. There's loads of problems with all sorts of writing about.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But he does offer something, doesn't he?
What did you say? He takes the neutral as masculine.
Yeah.
What do you mean, though?
Well, that when he talks about it's really the masculine.
That's masculine. All right. Yeah.
Okay. That's the what's the name? Elizabeth Grosz goes on about it. Yeah. Yeah, but just beautiful. But the poetics of it, tremendous, Annie, as well. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I really, really enjoyed that.
Good.
Very good, very strong.
Was that amazing moment when someone told you had boobs?
Oh,
Yeah.
What a shock.
I'll never forget it. I'll never forget Brian.
I have to cut this. It's being recorded, Sally.
It was really good, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasius.
Okay, I'm with a quick cuppa.
Yeah, let's all have a quick cup of tea.